anyway, this is fantastic that we are able to draw such a tremendous crowd for a very special evening with so beautiful. I actually am not the official person who is going to be giving the introduction to the cook, because we have, Eric has asked Craig Hodges to do that, but unfortunately he is not going to be able to do this in real life, but maybe in real time he's going to be able to do that. So I'm going to have Craig Hodges give the introduction to Peter.
When Peter's crew began slinging colorful shards of their agenda for new architecture, most of the world took shelter. It was an avalanche, a tsunami, a game-changing way of looking and building that lurched and propagated and morphed into disciplines like pod and network and modular, which would have been perfectly at home in today's world, but had no ready references in 1865 or thereabouts. None. Zero, zilch. And it wasn't just the words. It was the colors. In the monotone world of Nice and SOM, architecture had forsaken color in a search for moral and intellectual purity. So God only knows what they thought of the lime green, lipstick pink, and aqua lozenge-shaped pods coursing diagonally over streets and rivers. There were more words. Cushion in the title block of a mock series design drawn by Peter's partner in crime, Ron Heron, and beneath an enormous projection of a babe, yeah, there were babes in the 60s, chummed beneath the gaily colored balloon, all punctuated with vertical car silos and entertainment centers, even a sin center. It's hard to know now, looking back at the years that saw blow-up and bell-bottoms and freedom marches, whether the amazing archigram was a symptom or a cure. But one thing is clear. Their vision was perhaps the only genuinely radical recipe for what ailed the world to come out of Britain. In fact, to come out of anywhere, and it caught the professional world off guard. At Yale, where I was studying at the time with James Sterling, a few of us would nick copies they'd sent to the dean and would pore over it page by page, trying to extract the essence of his style. But it was like the monkeys trying to imitate the Beatles. There was no way to clone the special English mix of irony and enthusiasm that fueled their work. They were like the Beatles in another way too, because their individuality, their creative output, jingled and jangled like a garage band instead of the elevator music and its architectural equivalent that had almost suffocated the US. Years pass, Archigram disbands. Their ideas are repurposed for museums and movies and home furnishings. It's like they're hibernating. But Cook keeps popping up. Competitions, master classes, juries. The ideas keep coming. Fashions come and go, and there he is. A long-time inspiration of the AA, peppering the avant-garde with his students who want to do big things. Then a jump to Bartlett, where as director he turns that proper Betty English school on its head. And then, just as things by rights ought to be winding down, he hits a big one. If you haven't checked it out, I'm sure he will discuss it tonight. And if you have, well, that's probably why you are here. So without further ado, I give you Sir Peter Cook.
I'm going to do a bit of dissection of myself. It's not, I don't think it's a paranoid dissection, and I don't think it's entirely academic, but I'm fascinated by cause and effect. And I think, speaking as a teacher, which I still sort of instinctively am, one is often really looking not only to the end result, but one is looking at the cause and effect. And so this evening I've sort of thought about two, almost like the fact that the most interesting things that one do always have a sort of upside and a downside, a front side and a back side. And many years ago, there was a magazine article done by the late James Sterling, a fat Englishman, the other fat Englishman to Cedric, and it was about the fronts and the backs. And Sterling, for the purpose of defending the project, drew this analysis of how the front was circumspect and the back let it all hang out. But the back was the interesting part. And perhaps that's a subplot. But what I'm going to do also, I think, is not to be consistent about what is the hard, what is the soft. I think there are many kinds of hard or soft. When I was a kid, when I was already only 13 or 14, I wanted to be an architect. And I insisted on my parents taking me to see funny bits of stones in corners of fields which had been Roman towns. I collected cathedrals and castles like people collect railway numbers. By the age of 14, I started going to the local library. And one day, I saw this in a book. And though I may be probably the oldest person in the room, I'm not sure, even I wasn't alive when this thing existed. So it was never more than a black and white photograph of something that had already been pulled down many years before. But it was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my collection of castles and cathedrals and, you know, living in Norwich, which had 40 medieval churches. And when you live in a town with 40 medieval churches, they're much about the same. You know, you're getting bored. You know. But this was sort of like an airplane or something. It was like one of those biplanes or something. It had tents and it was weird, and yet at the same time, in my naivety, I realized it was kind of special. I didn't know why. And from that moment, I didn't want to be just an architect, and I wanted to be a modern architect, whatever that meant, if it led to this kind of stuff. And many years later, sort of see more and more photographs of it, but never, of course, having seen the real thing. And I suppose one gets out of it what you want. If I analyse the plan, which is available in books, I realise that Asplund's Paradise Restaurant at the Stockholm Exhibition of 1930, which one could digress on the subject of that, which was the Swedes bringing Russian constructivism to a sort of polite society that didn't really understand it. Nonetheless, this Paradise Restaurant has a fairly normal plan and uses partie with which, you know, modernist analysis is familiar. But it was the hanging of the skins, and they're nothing special. I mean, you know, Swedish sunblinds and Swedish sunblinds. But it was the fact that the soft part, the skin part, this almost catch it as you can, kite-like thing, was more than just placement, was more than just glass and steel architecture. One didn't quite know why, but one instinctively knew that this was special. And the irony was that the little local architecture school I went to before I went to the A was the last place in the UK that was still doing the École de Beaux-Arts course. We were taught to draw the 5 orders of architecture by proportion. We were taught to measure Gothic churches with bits of lead, and all that stuff and all that stuff. So in a sense, the hard and soft of architecture has been there right from the age of 16 when I was allowed to go to the architecture school. And this, which is like me as a historian of my own work, 40 odd years later, can analyse and read all that's written about it, but also have to reveal to you, perhaps not for the first time in this room, that what the plug-in city is really about is not just the exchange of hardware, but is to do with the search for romanticism, which in certain circles might itself be considered as a soft option. And that when things moved on a little bit, only 2 or 3 years, and this drawing, in fact, was drawn in Westwood Village, where I was staying at the time, drawn looking back at England, but conscious of what was around it at that time in Los Angeles, very different from LA now. It was consciously to do with a certain softness of the slippery, that the tower could disappear, that it was also a will-o'-the-wisp, an untouchable thing that could go before you had wanted. Now we live a reality of this stuff. The sort of stuff that Archigram was talking about is something which I move through one of these things probably 2 or 3 times a week on average these days. And in the bottom left-hand corner is David Green's favorite device from one of the Archigrams, the Mobot. And here's the irony of this particular Mobot that I photographed is on the roof of the architecture school in Oslo. The architecture school in Oslo, I personally feel, is doing rather nice but dull work. There's nobody underneath that roof. There are big studios, wonderful big studios. Nobody underneath that roof is doing anything like as intriguing as what the Mobot implied. So there is a certain irony. The place that can afford to have the Mobot robotically mowing its lawn has within itself something that is, in my mind, as dead an architectural atmosphere as anywhere else you might find. And of course, there is the softness, or is it the hardness, of something that just does something. Flinging its arms, an idea which nobody asked me to do, but which was retained many years later in a small and circumspect condition of a small academy in Germany, flinging its arms. And the same engineer, this is the first thing I did with a certain Klaus Bollinger, who you may know better as the engineer now for all of Karl Himmelblau's work and for the building that's represented on my chest here. This is early days of Klaus helping us to fling arms. Pop-up books that were flinging and saying, we do take what we do seriously, but doesn't matter, let's laugh at it and enjoy it. Albeit that the project in hand could be said as a kind of compositional study or a cultural study. You put up a kind of hat stand and then you throw at it a number of different things that you borrowed and see if it works three-dimensionally. That is quite a hard approach. I think this is not a soft project, even though the little fiddly bits at the bottom generated, in fact, the plug-in city, which I've just shown. If I take a few old tower projects, one can see again that sort of almost standard device of having an armature, that is to say a tower, and throwing stuff at it and letting it happen. If the one on the left, which is one of a series of 6 or 8 stages of things happening, taken at one of its hotter moments. Without the tower, it would be very difficult to make the assemblage. Is it thus that the hard is necessary in order to generate the softness of the soft? In the middle example, which isn't strictly speaking a tower, the soft is the vegetation, and as I may have told some of you before, in this room, the tower is in Hampstead, and England is supposed to be damp, and the whole project is based upon the watering of the south facade so that the vegetation may happen. The north facade, that way, is extremely high, almost rations, and therefore it is called Dampstead, and the damp trickles insidiously and slowly. In my wife's town of Tel Aviv, on the scene on the right, the whole thing is a kind of club sandwich of successive groups of people. Some of them very hard, and some of them soft as underneath the hardness. And in Brisbane, which I just recently revisited, the 2 towers juxtapose the one, the buttoned up world, let it all live inside, complete, perhaps corporate, with just a handkerchief hanging on the top. And the other in the old Brizzo kind of tradition, well, I can't do the accent as you can tell, but where lots of creepy crawlers climb up the wooden and metal palisades and run out across the decks. It was in fact taking that strange turn of the 19th and 20th century housing in Brisbane, up and down these funny little hills with the creepy crawlers coming up, and saying perhaps that can be just as much an architecture. So in a way, the juxtaposition here is of the uptight to the hangout, perhaps artificially placed side by side. On the right is a tower for Paris, drawn in Tel Aviv. I always seem to be in the other place, which is sometimes quite good. You detach on it. A tower drawn in Tel Aviv by an Englishman for Paris. Now there's a screw up before you get going. And the hard and the soft is very clear to see. The soft gardening can continue to grow right the way up of the hard tower. Early days still, where perhaps one makes an artificial landscape in the top example in order that the captured building within can just play a peekaboo trick. In the landscape at the bottom, the peekaboo is happening another way. You walk across the landscape, nothing is seen. Nothing is seen on the horizon until you suddenly fall into it. I'm fascinated by, I suppose, the unexpected, or I'm fascinated by the business of playing the apparently one thing that then suddenly reveals the other. Later, and only probably 8 or 9 years after Plug-in City, could I bring myself, could I bear to come back to the proposition of the megastructure. After all, I think boredom is a justifiable creative condition, as long as you do something about it and keep moving. I've become bored by the megastructure, become bored by the bits and pieces that one can put in nicely and take out nicely. In fact, my criticism now of Plug-in City would be that it was all far too consistent. Albeit, as I say, the instinct was a romantic instinct. How could one weld systematized building into something that wasn't just 4 square blocks? Returning at this point via both Frankfurt and a suburb of Tokyo, I'd have to give a long chat to explain quite how that works out. This is a kind of garden draped on a megastructure with little tiny pavilions peeking through. And there, the soft again demands the hard. That is to say, if we regard the vegetation as soft, and I will hopefully build up an argument to hint that perhaps the vegetation is not only, or not always, the soft component. In Houston, and I'm jumping about date-wise, don't trap me into, it's not completely chronological, it's sometimes is, sometimes isn't. But here one's looking at the fascination that I have with the part of Houston that is where I've been most often, which is around Rice, where there is tree cover at about the 3rd floor level. If you sit up in the Zaza Hotel at about 4th floor, you don't see any buildings, very, very few. If you come down to 2nd floor level, suddenly there's a city under there. I was absolutely fascinated by this. Fascinated also, of course, by the transportation, the fact that it makes Los Angeles almost feel like a European city by comparison. And that one's interest was therefore taking these two phenomena. One, the vegetation occurring at 3rd floor, and the other, the potential of an entirely car-based condition at ground level, and then digitalizing that, making it a kind of a control system on the ground, and then rendering the freeway that runs past it as a series of markers. That, in a way, is a very hard element. In an earlier project, a competition many, many, many years ago, the hard ground melts to become the transparent and translucent top. But that in itself is relatively tough by comparison with the garden, which is a different kind of melt. Can hard transmogrify into soft. Can time have this effect? This is a project also, an old project, where Berlin could have aspects of the American West brought to it. I used the cactus. I used various kinds of grottos and drapes. It was, after all, at that moment, still West Berlin. And the project is called Way Out West, where one made a kind of parody of this East-West condition, but borrowing not from the east coast of the United States, but borrowing from the West to take to Berlin. If you do that over a series of phases, you end up with weird situations architecturally. Very often those projects that I've done which are predicting a series of stages, I get to about number 6 or number 8 in the series, and I say, my God, I've gone too far, and don't know what to do with it anyhow. So these are two, the plan form of the latest stage of Way Out West on the right, and a funny old drawing based upon a word that the late Rainer Banham and the late Cedric Price would use extensively in the 60s and early 70s, which is the English word, I don't think English may or may not be in the dictionary, the word gunge. It's all gunge. You know what I mean? It's all gunge sort of stuff, you know. And it's any old stuff, basically, including something that's pink. God knows what pink is. And I've been fascinated by this, and we'll return to that theme later. If one is interested in the kind of gungy mix, even somewhere that's a nice sweet town like Graz, if you look at it from the air, it's also a bit of a gungy mix. Look at the top of the picture, where all the trees are. If you look closely, you can see there's a bit of a castle up there. It's a bit of a castle that I think Napoleon knocked about a bit, and there's bits of it left, but it's up on this big hill that rises behind the town. On the right-hand side of the picture is the Baroque town, a Baroque town which, until very recently, sported 2 branches of Laura Ashley. That is to say, 1 Laura Ashley for every piece of town about the size of Santa Monica, which tells you about the nature of the town. It's a town where the crooked finger of the delightful white wine is extant. And then there's a very mad kind of river that runs down it. And if you look near the bottom left-hand corner, you will see our thing. I'm well aware of the fact that probably most of you in the room have seen pictures of the thing. Some of you I know have been there. So I'm not going to give a long description of it, except to make a few points vis-a-vis context, vis-a-vis, I suppose, hard and soft. I think that the great thing about Graz was that for the architecturally experimental or semi-experimental, it is a soft touch. It had, after all, 20 or more years of what is called the Grazer Schule playing around there. Gunter Domeni, Volker Ginke, Klaus Kader, a lot of other guys lesser known, doing, when I say doing their thing, doing a variety of things. And perhaps it is the nature of an old city that sort of hugs onto bits of hills and bits of this, and it's never, as far as I know, been attacked for about 1,000 years. So it's sort of just growed. It's full of architects and all boring things like that. But anyhow, and has, interestingly, for the case in point, has a strong tradition of iron crafting. There's iron ore somewhere up the river, and so the smelting of iron and the making of metal objects has led to a very intense local tradition of crafting, which perhaps for a building that is still, after all, a handcrafted building, by and large, despite the amount of computer hours spent on it, is relevant. I think that it leads to the puzzling issue of whether every kind of building can be done in every kind of place. I think if you build here, or Stuttgart or somewhere like that, then you can do a complex building like this on the cheap. And it was on the cheap, we still haven't been paid. the proposition was a form of hard and soft in a sense. If you look at the top of the left-hand side, the rectangular part of the building, the left-hand side is an old metal house. Yes, an old metal building called the Eisen's House, the Iron House, the earliest cast iron building in southern Austria. And the top bit is some sort of third-rate Baroque stuff that we had to keep. And we arrived, Colin and I sort of arrived at this shape, I think, not by saying we want to make a bubble. We loved it once we got it, but we didn't start. We just said, we both knew the site very well already, long before. And we said, let's just put it there. Let's just, it's like squeezing up ketchup. Fill in the space. Reasonable enough. Keep it 2 meters away from the wall, and you've got your fire escape. Lovely. And so there it was. And then one let 3 pods drop down. 1 for stairs, 1 for toilets and cafe, 1 for goods. And then we had to incur into the Eisner's house. And we called it Pin and Skin. And Jamie, sitting somewhere in the audience here, will remember that because he was one of the people working on the Pin and Skin thing in the early days of the project. Just a skin, and then you go up by a very obvious way. And I like the fact, don't forget that the 2 branches of Laura Ashley and all of that. The idea of going in an Austrian art gallery up an ornery thing like a travelator, just like in a department store or railway station, appealed to me. Maybe you'd still have your crooked finger in the glass of wine shaking slightly as you go up to the Vernissage, maybe not. But it was, in a way, a deliberate attempt at nonchalance, a deliberate attempt at just gliding up. You just go up there and there's a bit of space and get round the edge of it. Bob's your uncle, end of story. Of course, there is more to it than that. Car parks, elevators, connectors, funny rooms that you store chairs in. And on the left-hand side, you will see that the Eisner's house had to be reconstructed. It was far too feeble to stay up. I'll come back to that in a moment. Here, you see the Iron House, which at great expense and loss of life, great expenditure of, I think there were still Austrian shillings, just about, or euros. We propped this thing up, and we had to be very circumspect. And then we discovered this piece of Austrian culture had been shipped in from Sheffield, England. So there were some 19th century nudies who sold some rubbish to Graz, and some 20th century, end of 20th century loonies from England selling some more plastic rubbish. I mean, don't mean that at all, do I? But it does give you another sort of take on the question of the hard and the soft. What is hard? Because you had to backfill that relic with a lot of concrete, circumspect, rectilinear concrete, to backfill it, prop it up. Then it looks as if it's a great tough building, and our thing's a sloppy old object, whereas in fact ours is, Klaus Bollinger filled it with useful triangulated steel. And the rest, as they say, is history. And one liked to play games with the town. There are a lot of people there crowding. There's no exhibition on the time the photograph was taken. A lot of people crowding to look through the nozzle. Now, the notion of these nozzles, not entirely satisfactory, as a matter of fact. The notion of the nozzle was to bring in some natural light to the upper gallery. Therefore, good boys, we followed the book. The nozzles face north, you get the north light, except for the naughty nozzle. He doesn't face north, he faces because you look through the naughty nozzle and you can see the castle. Now it's a rubbish castle, but it's the only one they've got and everybody goes through it. So you look at it, and it's actually a requotation of a very old trick that Mike Webb invented in the 60s for an exhibition we did called Living City, where we had similarly done a cocoon, much smaller. And he got these ventilation tubes poking out into the street, acting as a view, as a, what do you call it? I think what you look through, SCI-Arc. And it was the same trick. The periscope. One just borrowed the periscope from 20 or 30 years, whatever it was before, and applied it to the castle. And London had been looking at buses going down Piccadilly. Everybody came in on the bus, went into this thing, paid their money, and then they queued up to look at the bus. They'd just come in. The people are lovely in this respect. And one said, you know, it'll work. Let's have a naughty nozzle. I think Jamie might remember that Colin and I had many ideas to have many more naughty nozzles and moving nozzles and all. There just wasn't the cash. There was the cash, though, to keep, after the competition stage, one of our favourite pieces, which was meant to be a restaurant, but the fire regulations wouldn't allow it. That is, in a sense, of course, a return to modernist party. You have a bubble, and then you allow it to have as a parasite to itself a modernist part. Now, I throw open to my friends in the audience, who I love dearly, who are doing this very consistent stuff. How many of you have the balls to allow it to take on board also a naughty, which is a reverse naughty? Albeit that, of course, my reverse naughty was because, as a fifth-year student of the A, I and a few cronies had been allowed into a cupboard to look at this very special, very precious book of Chernikov's 101 Fantasies. I have a suspicion that they may in fact have sold it for a vast sum in order to keep floating, but maybe it's still there. I haven't been back to see. But this notion of this held thing was something, I suppose, in a very low level, I wanted to do one. Always wanted to. There are a couple of other things that I might mention that I want to do. And you wait sometimes years and years, I mean, bloody hell, it's year 2000 from finishing at the school, that 40 years one had waited with this Chernikov thing in the back pocket, waiting to do it. And it was, Danielle was with me at the time, the day that they just got the steel for the needle, that piece up. Though the bubble was the thing that everybody wet their knickers over, you know, worried, the town was worried, could we do it, da 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 da. Yeah, okay, bubble schmubble, yes. But that thing, with classes, wonderful engineering ability, that was the bit that raised the first real smile on my face when I saw it on the skyline. I thought, yes, like the old advertisement, men, it can be done. This one means there's a heavy loaded drawing. Yes, well, it would not have been possible without all this stuff, of course. We might conceivably have drawn such a thing way back when, but it never would have been possible to actually do it. Virtually on time, 6 weeks late, virtually on budget, 3%. And as I said, Colin and I still haven't been paid. That was the downside. There are other things that you incorporate, though. The notion of the sleek building, the notion of the artificial, is something which has fascinated me for a long time. And you will notice, in fact, it was Raymond Abraham, who some of you know, who once commented apropos this drawing, if you had been Viennese, the vegetation would have destroyed the glass. But I'm not Viennese. I mean, keep it down. Keep it under control. Bugger off. But, borrowing again from the English tradition of the 18th century, the Restoration comedy, the coquette, the Restoration comedy, you may know, would apply a paper birthmark to thereby call attention to the fact that her face is beautiful. So sometimes one is historicist. Sometimes one is playing a sort of game between the total and the perfect and the imperfect. I'm not sure whether that's softness. I think it's an admission of the fact that to be complete and total and only one layer of the harmony is sometimes tedious. Colin and I wanted to do about 7 conditions where this transparent to translucent naughtiness would occur, and the city had cold feet and said, you're getting expensive, down Fido. And so we only got away with 2. But it's still one of my favourite parts. It's really a quotation of something else that I've been wanting to do for years, which is the notion, as with that house project, where one goes almost imperceptibly from solid through translucent to transparent, and almost imperceptibly back. Because one of my intrigues in the history of architecture, well, there are 2 really. One is the tyranny of the window, and the other is the tyranny of the ground plane. But I would need a completely different lecture to discuss those fully. But in a sense, I suppose one's instinct of hard against soft and back again is that the tyranny of a single point of view. Perhaps I'm being very English in that, I'm not sure. But there is this tradition of English literature and English writing and English thinking, I think, which is that the aside is often more interesting than the end direction. We have difficulty with polemic. We have difficulty with extreme politics. We have difficulty with the total right and the total wrong. And some of the most interesting of our writers, I think, are those who are able to describe a nasty person as having some side of reasonableness, and a reasonable person as having an edge of the sinister, etc., etc. And the storyline runs there. It is the aside, it is the episode, it is the unrequited subtext, which is often the fascination. Well, back to the details of the building. I've often said of this building that it's not high-tech. I have never worked in Norman Foster's office and all of that. I have delighted when some of my ex-students have come drooling back to say, we have just done the longest neoprene gasket in the world, or we have done the finest joint in the world, or you will not see the joint, or the glass is supporting the glass, isn't there. And you think, oh, great, nice, yes, why not? But this is crap tech. You couldn't afford high tech. It's very, very simple, and we had some wonderful progeny of these local craftspeople in the Moor Valley who knew about sticking bits on bits that were made of this, and you turn the screw and it's there and it'll be there for a while. It isn't. Guns in there. There's a wonderful moment which Colin saw and I didn't, which was when the needle part was actually 7 centimeters dangling, and he said they came along with a bit of metal, stuck it in there, welded it in. No problem, we still have it. And although I did admit that at the opening night that it was wobbling a bit, and I was standing next to Klaus Bollinger, the architect and the engineer. We said we couldn't notice anything. She said, you're both pissed. So she was probably right. And anyhow, I have also been with about 60 Bartlett students some years ago at the moment at which the director of this school was putting a piece of complicated glass in on one of his buildings in Culver City. And it was the moment at which the piece of 4x2 was necessarily having to be used, much to various red faces. The story, of course, went back to London like wildfire. So we've all been there. Doesn't, I'm sure, some gentlemen sitting in the front row also been there, perhaps more often than once. At night, the thing changes into a kind of light show. There are now, of course, 5 years later, many, many of these. I think there are whole magazines and whole books about walls that have light shows. Not all of them are as naughty. They usually, the ones I've seen in Tokyo and elsewhere, tend to be rather flat. The lights are much cleverer and more, these are bathroom fittings anyhow, but the lights are more clever. But the building is very flat, as if it has to be like a, I think to sort of project onto a thing that wasn't really wanting to be projected onto. projected through. It's quite nice. It's like deliberately, you know, deliberately having a sort of bum to show your home moon is on to. So what's happening. I like things like that. Whether that's being soft or hard, I've lost the thread on that. Nonetheless, we are delighted when we go to Vienna that there's this great big illuminated thing that says, Austria, the land of the old and the new, and they use the stroker. We have, of course, our own tradition of the sleek, probably higher tech than crap tech, as a matter of fact, rather difficult tech for 130 years ago, whatever it was. And this is my favourite building in London, and I suppose it's always there in my mind. It was sitting there behind that striped, multicoloured thing. It was sitting there at moments of Graz. It's still sitting there. And if they can do it, we can do it surely. This is a picture of our garden at home. In the snow, we did have a bit of snow this year. We had about 2 days of snow, and it looks very pretty. If one looks into the depth of the garden, Yael, who comes from Tel Aviv, always says that in London you have an automatic garden. We do almost nothing, occasionally mowing, and it just does its thing. But you will notice a sort of handmade object in the distance, certainly a crap-tech object made by myself, to which there are aspects of the inside of the flat that are similar, so that it's as if a piece of the inside of the flat is ricocheting out into space. And this notion of the ricochet is something that has intrigued me many times. With Christine Hawley, we did a competition, another Austrian competition, which we also won, which was for a place called Bad Deutsches Altenburg, the site of a Roman remains. And you will see from this that there are a series of small objects with ley lines connecting them. We borrowed 2 of the objects from the existing site at the top, a burial mound and the Gothic church, and we added our own 4 objects, whereby the components of each of our objects were angled towards the next, so that the ley lines are also affecting the geometry of the parts. And it's a ricochet played 6 times, in a sense. From this, the most complex of the buildings, to this one of the smaller buildings, and up the hill, and always the parts receiving the ricochet. That is one way of dealing with the softness of the ground, to have the very hard object that glitters and is extremely alien, and you send a signal to it. The other that fascinates me a lot is, of course, the German tradition of gardens, though partly borrowed from history and elsewhere. This is the garden of the castle at Würzburg, which, if you count the number of striations, you can count 11 systems of holding the vegetation. An extremely sophisticated system whereby you play a game with the softness. Now, of course, the irony of the thing is that man cannot completely control the soft vegetation. If you leave it, if you don't garden it, if you don't clip it, it will start to get hairier. And I guess over time, each striation will become more and more similar to the next, except the balustrade and the path. And even they eventually will be overgrown. But what is intriguing here is that there is a whole range of architectural language made simply by controlling growers. It's an extraordinary thing that you can get such a degree of variety. The only, as I say, the only eccentrics of that are the balustrade and the path. And I suppose it's this kind of thing which has always underscored work that I've done in recent years. The veg house, which I'm sure I've shown in this room at least 4 times, therefore go quickly through it. The veg house, which starts as an ordered, triangulated, covered, protected space, with some elements, with some suggestion of control, but only minimum suggestion of control of vegetation. The next stage, the vegetation moves in onto that system, various other parts maneuver. Further vegetation starts to be of an extremely polyglot nature. It's starting to incorporate electronics, growies, covering parts, sheltering parts, sound systems, and so on. And as it moves forward, the definition of each of it becomes, in a way, softened. And, are you listening to a loudspeaker, or are you eating a plum? Maybe the plum is the loudspeaker, so to speak. As the series goes forward, as I hinted earlier, it gets crazy, and it actually almost loses my control. It's almost that the drawing is telling me what it has to be, and you get to a point where you say, my God, let's stop. I can't go further, it's come up. There have been projects where I've then looped it back so that it returns to something as a sort of parody of the original stage. And inevitably, the softest scene of all is where one suggested a whole village of such objects, gardens and ponds and wet, smoky things might take place. The soft, in this case, therefore, where control has been abdicated. Whereas, oops, whereas returning to a buildable project in Madrid, they're not actually built. This is where the hard defines the nature of the piece of town. This is for a town near to Madrid called Pinto. And then the soft is the encouragement of small elements that can live almost as parasites underneath the skirts of the hard architecture. There you see the parasite parts sitting under the skirt of the blue housing. Now, I think on one occasion, again in this room, I talked a lot about kiosks. My wife says, you're always banging on about kiosks. Don't just show lots and lots of kiosks. I will come back next time and give a lecture entirely about kiosks. But for the moment, I take two favourite ones. The one on the left from her town, from Tel Aviv, which is in the wonderful modernist tradition. You have the boulevard, you have the bourgeoisie with the dog shits at the boulevard, you walk on, and at the end of the boulevard is a rounded cornered concrete kiosk. It happens in this case to be run by an extremely enterprising guy who loves juice, has these things hanging, always has a queue, blah, blah, blah. That is modernism in the kiosk world. On the right is a London example, just outside the window of our Crab office, which is Mr. Coffee, He's So Frothy. And it is, of course, straight from archigram. The archigram proposition, the mobile element, the sophisticated piece of machinery, and the extension. Cushion for coffee, if you like. Okay, it's not as easy, but it's exactly an archigram proposition. These things exist. Architecture lives full on, and what's intriguing is how the locality uses it and transmogrifies it. But I will need to go and show you 50 more examples of kiosks, which take too long. So, the whole proposition in Madrid, this is now on the edge of Madrid itself, is to pull those kiosks in under the skirts, again like the Pinto project, the progeny of the Pinto project now in Vallecas, where they're pulled in under the skirts, and life will go on in this otherwise tedious, dull, dead place that they're building up there. Well, and it's happening. I'm delighted to announce that I'm sort of delighted. The builder has gone bankrupt, and there ain't much more of it within this photograph at the moment, but it is public housing. I'm constantly being assured by dodgy people that it will happen. And finally, at some time, hopefully not too late, the naughty kiosk. Because the city of Madrid wants wants Gavin and I to design the kiosks. I said, oh no, you must design, that's not the point, we want really nasty kiosks. You know, and I had 7 years of expensive architectural education. Gavin went to the Barts at SCI-Arc and Harvard, so he's no good either. You know, we want some Herbert to come and do a really unpleasant kiosk. You need a special class in undoing. But, of course, on the other hand, there was a moment when I would have thought that this was enough. In a sense, perhaps there's a certain irony and beauty in the playing out of what was a much earlier drawing called the Hulk, where I said, look, the essence of the thing is to put up the Hulk, and the architecture will come. I, in the way of business, I want the architecture to come, thank you very much, says, you sent me a bit of fee. But it does raise the issue of what you do as a proposition, what happens in real life. Is the hard enough in either of those cases? I can argue that in the earlier drawing, the hard was then accompanied by a whole series of drawings that said this could fit it in, that could fit it in, somebody else could come and fit it in, blah, 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 blah. And I'm somewhat displeased that the hard is still just the hard, because I can't wait to see the soft happen. And of course, a lot of the sort of particularity of the project lies in the soft. More recently, I wanted to mention kiosks once more, but I'm mentioning it by way of a project. We do stupid competitions like most people. And this was a stupid competition where they didn't have the money, and in fact they couldn't afford to give more than a third prize to all the schemes that had gone in, which was about thruppence. So anyhow, it was for a footbridge in Skopje. We did about a year ago, and we thought it was a bit of a jolly one, we'll do it quickly. And I said, being at the kiosk, I said, hey, you know, boring going over a footbridge. What do? You just cross the river and go to the other side. He says, how about a kiosk? thirsty in Skopje. And then Gavin said, hey, how about making the kiosk move? Because that's much better than just sitting in the middle. And then I said, hey, how about it having a bar on top of the kiosk? So the kid, you know, gets his chop ice. But you know, Dad, the legs come down at 6 o'clock in the evening, you trot up and there's a Sliverbits bar upstairs, which may or may not have amused the locals, I have no idea, but it would be a great thing to have on Santa Monica Pier, or perhaps on Venice Pier, which is a smaller, quieter pier, or somewhere. I mean, I don't care where. That's going definitely in the back pocket. Hold on, you're going to see that one somewhere. We're going to do the moving kiosk with the bar on the top and the chocolate ice is underneath. It's a cheap trick, it's not difficult. And then we found ourselves doing another funny old competition, which we won. Doesn't mean it comes out of the ground. But we won this one. It was for a town called Verbania. It's on the north shore of Lake Maggiore in Italy. And we spent a lot of time over it, which is probably why we won it. And we looked a lot at the urban grain. And again, the question of hard and soft comes in, because there is, on the left-hand side, you see the kind of, not exactly a freeway, but a noisy through road. And on the right is the town itself. And the approach to the building, which is a theatre, small theatre, restaurant, museum, bookstore, and so on. It's a theatre complex. And you approach it from the soft side, and you move up through the porous part of the building. And then the back, which happens to face the tallest buildings, as you see at the top, is the hard back. So here's the soft side, which is market day, 2 days of the week. And you encourage that it is actually a soft part of the town. That you know, there is, of course, the professional performance time to time. But you know, and I know, that in small towns, the more important performance is to be seen at the opening, to be seen hanging around the barn, to be seen on the scene of the theatre. The theatre is an excuse, again, for the Italian equivalent of people with the finger drinking slightly different wine, to meet. On the other hand, you want it to genuinely be part of the little old place. You want to make it modest enough, which I think we hopefully have. Whether they will build it, sometimes, some weeks they say they're going to build it. Yes, they have the money. Other times they say the mayor's just changed and he's gone off with the money. Another week they say, yes, they got the money, really. Who knows? In essence, the building has its own architectural discipline. And then in a sense, one half of you clings to that discipline and the other half wants to make it amenable, at least to its edges. This is the game that we were playing also in Latvia for a concert hall that they didn't like. They said, we don't want that kind of thing here. So they didn't get it. And 2 weeks ago, we've just entered another competition, which is in Dublin, where the task is what they call the parlour. When you come into the parlour, you see, it's right by the O2 Centre, where you have all the shows. And the idea is that the shows will spill out into this parlour, which is actually a large square, about 4 times the size of this room. And the notion is that one has somehow controllable swarms of floaties and inflatables and a sort of carpet, an artificial carpet that comes up from the floor. We don't know. It's gone in so that you can imagine these pieces swarming, reconfiguring. And the show, again, rather like an extension of the Graz wall, the show taking over. I now move to the second action. Sometimes as soft as the context, this is not Europe's prettiest town. It's called Birmingham. And the task here was to clothe the station. You can see the coloured bit, which is our bit, as you might have guessed. And within that coloured stuff, we had to keep the whole of the existing rail station, which is Europe's busiest interchange. There are 40 million people who change trains there. And it is a crap building. They haven't got the money to change the crap building. What they wanted was a skinning job. And Birmingham is a funny place because from virtually all routes that you come upon this, you come down funny, narrow streets, and the character, you sort of run around the clock, around the building, the character of the immediate surround changes street by street. Some are scruffy streets, some are quite smart streets, some are dark streets, some are light streets, some are closed, and so on. And we then hit upon the idea of a kaleidoscope. We said, why not make each of these vistas down each of the streets have its own colour connotation? We worked it so that the south side would be pale and yellow and bright, and the north side, which has a rather terracotta street, would be the red street, and then the blue side would face the late lamented Jan Kuklitsky's building just down the way. So that there was, and then there would be certain light-bringing features, much larger than those in Graz, that would enliven the centre, but we couldn't actually change the basic structure. We made a lot of study models, we made a lot of variants of this proposition, which we didn't use on the computer. We made the building. We made the building to a much larger scale than asked for, just to weave it rather like basket weaving. And there's some of the guys down on the right weaving the building. And then the kaleidoscope works around the edges. It's rather fortuitous that this particular drawing or photograph shows it white. It's absolutely crap up there. It's like the back of some awful awful backyard place full of litter bins and tarmac, and grey, and horrendous car park, which we simply skinned in orange. But why not just run the competition with one that is not coloured and not quite so voluptuous as ours? But we had a wonderful time doing this skinning operation. I mean, it is, I don't know whether that, I mean, the whole, it's not soft in substance terms, but it's soft in the head in the sense it's just a skinning job, and you know damn well that somebody will come along 35 years later, unskin whatever skin, and stick some more skin on top, and the people, presumably by that time, 50 million people will be changing trains, probably. You know, the whole idea was that we made some of the orifices so that the tracking of the sun, even to the least sensitive person, would indicate that it was a different time of day. That was the idea. And then, anticipating the conversation in a week or two, 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, and the exhibition opening, of course, Vienna. The site is the Prater, the old hunting ground of the Viennese emperors, the famous wheel, as in The Third Man and various other movies. And the site is immediately alongside. The model suggests that this is our building, this is Tosh's building, this is Zaha's building in the middle, and so on and so forth. You know the list. When we sort of got into the selected group, or whatever it was, I looked, they said, which building will you do? And I don't think it was modesty, I think it was kind of tactics. I looked and I had a sniff. I sort of thought, if they're written to us and so on and so forth, from the source that it came, therefore there's going to be really, really heavy competition. Let's not go for the plum. Let's deliberately not go for the plum. Go for one of the others. I then looked at the plans and I liked the shape of this site. It's purely, don't go for the plum because it'll be really hard struggle. Let's go for the one with the interesting shape. And that was the one, you know, the rest. You know, we are now daily knocking euros off it. Once we had won our particular competition, we were told that unless we knocked 6 million euros, which is probably the equivalent of about $7.5 million, off the site, off the project, we would lose to the second prize winner. It's a really boring. It wasn't your director's project. It was the Spanish one. It was really boring. So nothing clears the mind more wonderfully than you'll lose it unless you knock 7.5 million off. So we sweated through January, knocked 7.5 million off. To which they then say, very nice, can you knock another 10% off? Sweating through May and June, they now say, thank you very much, can you just knock another 10% off? So it's kind of, you've heard architect stories. It's still pretty much the same, it's squeezed. And the idea of the building is deliberately slidey and slimy. One wanted a building that had a casual edge to it, a casual entering and re-entering. You kind of glide around casually. It's not sort of difficult to that. You can't do that stuff. Don't like it. And we developed it also by looking at the nature of the spaces, albeit that the ceiling heights have to be rather lower than we would like. So here is the ship. Now, one has been in the academic business for a while, and one's fascinated by really the proposition all along has been to say, yes, you have a seminar here, there's some studies there, the light switch there, but what do they do then? What can they do then? What else goes on in an agreeable college ambience. This is the most laid-back school of architecture in the world. Except I think there's some people, I think Didier is later here this evening, so I've got to be careful what I say. This is pretty, look at it, it's pretty laid. In fact, the guy with the blue works for us, so I can't call me that. And that's the garden of the École Spéciale in Paris. Very agreeable, very soft. One kind of model. Or your model, outside last Friday. A rather hard atmosphere. You have, after all, the hardest, if we're talking about hard and soft, my God, you've got the hardest building, agreeable it is. And then there's a little attempt at softness on the outside. Not much soft with the sun beating off it, but nonetheless, the instinct is there, perhaps. Or the interior of the École Spéciale, back again, hanging out in the École Spéciale. It's very agreeable. And not to be completely dismissed, because you get the bean counters, the number crushers, who sort of say, you know, there are so many people in this seminar, so many people in that seminar, the corridor is this, the norms, the stuff. But what do they do then in many places? And I've taught in, 100 different places. They just go out. They go out to a bar down the road. They go out into London. They go out into Paris. They go out into, get in a car and go out into LA somewhere. And that is a tragedy in a sense. Some of the best moments, are chatting. Where did I meet my wife? And so on. And the project has gone through other iterations. Gavin and I did another competition for the London School of Economics, another economics university, where we proposed, perhaps slightly inspired by the interior of the École Spéciale, that the formal teaching parts of the building would simply spill out into the middle, into this kind of rather deliberately laissez-faire core. And the model shows some events which are formalized, some less formalized. So, in the first stage of the Vienna competition, I did these dark drawings where I talked about what might go on in an Austrian university. Close inspection of the drawing, rough though it is, would suggest that all sorts of things might go on in Austrian university. Probably more based upon what goes on in Austrian bars. But one would like it to be so, would one not? And then, in this early stage, there was also the idea of the cake of knowledge. I don't know where it was, I think Gavin and I, after a few beers, talked about the library being the cake of knowledge. Cake of knowledge, very nice. Very nice. You're in the lecture, cake. Cake would look out over the Prater. When we had a consultation meeting, guys, they said, the library must be on the ground. The cake died. Sadness, really. And the administration is in the blue building. And at that point, the cafe, which found strayed from somewhere in the Kurfürstendamm, Berlin or something, had drifted off the building. And the cake would be seen above the trees. There would be the part of the trees filtering cake and knowledge. Well, the cake dropped, but what we then said is, okay, if the cake drops to the ground, we will bring the ground over the cake. If you want a pudding, we'll make it a pudding. But the trickling continues. This is a fairly recent plan. At the moment, we've had to condense some of those nice spaces where people have fallen drunk under the table and all that, but they're still there, thank God. And we fight hard to keep them. It's still rounded, it's still relatively casual, but it's very tightly planned. And the library, which you see in the sort of patch on the left of the larger building, has the slopes moving over it all. I got a phone call yesterday telling me that as soon as I get back on Monday, I've got to redesign the slopes because the pitch is wrong. And that's architecture. That's sort of enjoyable in a perverse kind of way. And so, in a sense, you bring the soft over the hard. And then, as anybody who's working on one of these projects knows, you have all these standardized rooms with tedious norms and low ceilings and so on. And there you see the terracing the garden as it wraps over. It develops, it has a series of wheelchair ramps that give the structure to the library and act as beams. You then plant on it, and it peels away to form this complex height of the library and the reading room above it. The entrance comes off the main university spaces and is an extension of it. I found actually that the master plan was very agreeable, at least in its intentions. This notion of certain pockets of shared space, pockets of space, which in contradistinction to the wooded park, which goes on for about a mile and a half, was something that appeals to me. And we will drape skins and filters over it. Our filters, in a sense, talking back to the filters of the trees. We look at it, of course, in terms of sun path diagrams, more ways of manoeuvring the garden. And then there's another issue, which I have sometimes talked about in other lectures, which is the question of captured space, of captured external space, the question of the interstitial space. And here again, I'm just going to perhaps artificially bring in the hard and soft conversation. If the built buildings are the hardware, the recognized space, which gives the impact, is soft. That is, impact is surely hard. It's the impact of the space you take away is that of the negative. So it plays a strange game upon the definition of hard and soft. In Graz, that, by the way, the previous example I showed was from Buenos Aires. It's the intersection of Corrido Testa's bank in Buenos Aires with the three other banks on the other corners of the small street. In Graz, again with this 2-meter condition, one gets some of the best spaces of the building, being the spaces between the substantive parts. When we're cutting and honing, we spend a lot of time just tweaking and tweaking. We haven't used one of your machines. We cut again, glue it on, cut again, weed and weed and weed and weed. But we're still doing it. Now in the studio, whilst that's been going on, a little after some of it, there's something quite inconsistent. You look down there, you can see that Damstead old model still there. You can see various people working away in various soft toys and things and stuff. Gavin looking rather worried and serious. And then in the background, a funny old drawing, which I did at Christmas. And the funny old drawing is a sort of endless piece. I drew it in Norway, but I didn't fly over the part of Norway that it might reflect, if Norway it is, I don't think it is, until I finished the drawing. When you move in on the drawing, it is, at first sight, relatively soft. It's an endless forested, vegetative, whatever thing. But then you will notice these rivulets of hard pieces, raising the issue of where is the architectonic part. Clearly the hard piece is represented, it's not a Canadian log river, it is actually, notice, if you look at it, there's a side, so it is actually built form. It is a sliver of architecture, back to an early theme perhaps, a sliver of architecture occurring within the soft. Looking closer still, you find some naughties, naughty, naughties, naughty dances, and cylinders, what are they? Were they what the Birmingham thing wanted to be, but didn't top it? I think they came from that. When we were discussing the Birmingham project in early stages, when I had these dunces caps, they've cut them off, they've come back again. They're naughty, they're silly, consciously perhaps silly. And the other day in London, we found one, right by the festival hall. There's a silly, it's exactly one of those sillies poking up. There's something mysterious, sinister, and shiny peering through the bush. Beware of the British bush. It might contain the sinister and the unexpected. And of course, we go back to a drawing that Gavin and I did 4 years ago for the Biennale, which was looking at a piece of East London and infiltrating it with 54 typologies of funny little bits and pieces, sheds and workplaces and hydroponic gantries and all sorts of funny, strange typologies. Moving in on the drawing, you see that some are loosely structured and some are vegetated and some are little insertions. There's a trick to this, because I have to admit that I come from the seaside, areas where there were many estuaries, and Gavin was born a mile away from the bottom of the picture, which is the Norfolk Broads, a series of flooded lakes, flooded pits that became lakes. And this fascination, I think, in an earlier lecture in this room, I've talked about the ambiguity of the marshland. The notion that the marsh is neither hard nor is it soft. It is neither land nor is it water. It is both, and it can be either. It's closely, marshland is closely related to gulch. And then back to another favourite from Germany, which is the orangery at the Castle of Karlsruhe, where in the middle of the 19th century, some buffoon thought it was a good idea to make a system of ironwork enclosure that would never have glass in it, that would have vegetation, that would create the enclosure. So those guys were there before, of course. And again, a detail from the 4 years ago project where one is talking about the allotment, the old thing that you go out into a little hut in the garden, and the fact that allotment perhaps generating a larger scale urban structure. And we have such things. If you look carefully in London, you can find relatively hard architecture with these secret patches of allotments. Not on the edge of town, not up and down the railroad, right. This is just near Regent's Park. And if you use that, and then occasionally you have a sort of outburst. This was the first outburst at what Birmingham might have turned into if it had fingers. And then back again to some old stuff. If I go back into earlier projects, this notion of the wobbling, bubbling surface element, of the orifice that goes from hard to soft, from transparent to translucent to solid. These themes run around, and so in a sense, this drawing, done as a holiday drawing, has a background. And then the bits that in a sense even fascinate me more are the bits which are not clearly architecture, or even some of them there which are giveaway. They have little straight pieces and curved corners saying, I'm a piece of architecture, remember. But the pieces where there is a texture that is a little bit too controlled for its own good, which is something that you can't do if you try and apply the vegetation to a building. This is another lost Madrid scheme, lost because it's gone through planning, but there's no money. Or here, where one comes inside and suggests, it's called the Comfort Veg Club, where the vegetation is wrapping itself insidiously around the notion of comfortable elements. And there is a piece of it which, if you look carefully, has a rectilinear structure. Again, this point that to suddenly insert something which comes from another tradition can be fascinating. It forces the laissez-faire quality of the rest into perspective. And if you take the right photograph at the right moment in time, you can say, wait a minute, even that building is this precious thing, this sleek thing, poking itself out of the underground. Not really, because it's trees, but the proposition is lurking. And back to the drawing, where there are certain parts that are deliberately drifting and deliberately setting up some kind of discipline. Another Spanish project for an ecological office block, which again got killed by the Spanish economy. And back again to the drawing. The drifting elements, perhaps things seen out of the airplane windows you go over Australia, but drifting of parts, and then on closer inspection, some of them surely ambiguously neither fish flesh nor fowl, somehow wanting to be tectonic, but getting nervous as soon as they become too tectonic and slithering back into tadpole land, perhaps. And as the drawing was nearly finished, we flew up to the middle of Norway for a night or so, and then back again. And one saw this granular condition of land with snow and drifting vegetation. And then into the water, because as I said earlier, one comes from wet country. One is fascinated by allowing this to drift, and as it reaches the water, becoming clearly man-made, man-organized. Though for what? We're not quite sure. There's no sort of slipway with a boat on it, but perhaps the megastructure reveals itself to be just at the end point. Which brings me to the last project, which is back to the land of East London again. And you can see in the background some of the drawing that we did 4 years ago, development of it. And the notion of, with the oncoming flood, how London might start to grow up a form of a tree trunk, perhaps. An organization to do with sets and drifts and the way swarms, and a future where perhaps the floating sailing condition, which I notice many students in our class seem to have here, an interest in the floating element, but the floating element drifting towards and hanging on to the firmer structure. And the notion that these can be sustaining elements, they can be also, in our damp climate, catching water and holding it and drifting it down. And then the inside of this sort of evacuated tree trunk is actually a sort of Debenham thing. It really has much more to do with do-it-yourself than it has with architect land. Albeit that perhaps it too can be developed into something that is both. Whether this is hard or soft, or the attempt of hard to become soft, or all hardness having of itself the propensity of softening as necessary, somewhere I haven't got the story straight in my mind here. It's a very new project. It finished just the day before I came away. And there we are at play in London. I don't know what the protocol is now. If somebody wants to ask questions, I will take 3.
Sure, Peter, I wonder if you would talk a little bit to us and to the students about the role that for you drawing has had over your career as a way of thinking, and the way that it includes the process of thinking about building in particular. There's an incredible consistency and a real joy of drawing in your work, and it's something I think that is really worth recognizing and discussing.
There's a short answer, which is that I know no better. I can just about use the computer for this sort of purpose and stuff. And in fact, probably spend about 2.5 hours a day looking at the screen, but it's mostly sort of emails and texts and stuff like that. I know no better. The slightly longer, almost autobiographical answer is that when I enrolled in this little local architecture school, doing all these orders of architecture and stuff, I was by no means the best drawer in the class. In fact, I was a pretty crappy drawer. I'd been taken by my mother to art galleries and that stuff, but I'm not good at drawing people and trees and stuff. I've always been surrounded by people who draw better than me. It's a whole list of my closest colleagues, Gavin was a brilliant drawer, Ron was a brilliant drawer, David Green, Christine Moore, they're all brilliant, brilliant drawers. And I had to sort of huff and puff to keep up, not let the side down. And therefore, this just gets very boring perhaps, but as a first to third year student, I was such a messy drawer that I used to have to use a harder and harder pencil not to get it all over everything, things like that. It's only when I discovered ink that it suddenly rolled. And I have a funny thing, just to digress, sort of. I now, when I'm drawing, I don't take a pencil drawing seriously. But I take an ink drawing very seriously, even if it's freehand. I think that it's been a struggle, and that then you discover tricks that make it look as if you could draw. So I've been a great user of stencils. Close observers will have probably seen me yesterday at the SCI-Arc shop buying a stencil because I'm working on a drawing in the hotel which has to be finished on Monday. And I don't know how to, so I'm doing it. I may take it into the studio next week and get some of my colleagues to sort of wave a wand over it. But if I could do it myself. No, I think there's one thing which is a tricky one and probably won't be agreed with. I think that the struggle is sometimes useful. Now, I'm not some kind of, head-beating, bum-beating fascist. Sometimes the amount of time that it takes you to work around something gives you time to think about it. And I have noticed that some people that I know well, they sort of say, button, 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 it'll do it. And so they watch it rather like a spectator. And I wonder about that, because if you're a spectator, there's a bit of me, but it's the old sort of Stakhanovite psychology, which is if you struggle with it, you've had time to fight it. And architecture is a sort of business of fighting, particularly the sort of crappy methods and materials that we have to do. If you want to make a thing that says, there's lots of shit inside there that's bolted, they were in Graz, they have guys that are beating things with hammers, and all that stuff. And so Eric Moss's piece of 4x2 wood is not an unusual situation. And I think also it's the ability to very quickly deviate. With that drawing I did in Oslo, I had a program in my head which was just a diagonal drift. And I just drew on a series of small pieces of paper, which I then joined together, so it's easy for traveling. I had the drift, and I knew it had to have a C there and there. Then I started somewhere in the middle. And I knew in my head that I wanted these noughties to come out, and I knew they wanted to be vegetational drift, and I knew it must vary and develop towards some sort of decoys. And just did it. And it's sort of very enjoyable, so I haven't smoked for years, but it's sort of like I remember smoking. It's nice. A couple of hours in the morning, look out the window, we had a beautiful view. and I'll say, you do a bit more, and you know, oh, there's a nice little bit coming along here, you know. There's a bit of dotting, still a bit of dotting. You have a bit of dotting. Dotting goes on. Ah, let's turn, and then it goes. It's rather like conversation, sort of drifts. And then the next one, ah yes, haven't got enough over there. Let's. And it goes with your mood, and it's very controllable. I mean, yes, 40 years on, I can probably draw. I sell stuff in art galleries, so I suppose I can do books about it. So I suppose that proves I can. But I can't really. If drawing is mainly, I don't know. It's so ingrained, I can't really explain it. It's like conversation. It's like preparing a lecture. You know, this lecture, there's a morph of an earlier version. And since I've been in LA, I've probably added in about 28 pictures and taken out 28. But I can't tell you where, you know, my next one is in Sweden in about a month's time. I can't tell you what will have happened to it. Yes, people are very funny by that. So I always keep that in the same, because it always creates a certain amount of amusement. You never know whether there's somebody sitting in the audience who knows that they owe you money. SCI-Arc is lovely. They pay on the knob. But there have been places I've lectured in the last 3 months where I knew that they knew that I knew that they owed me money. And it actually has got about 28 things on file. But to answer your question, where does it, you know, I think there are certain post-rationalizations of yourself. I do not ride a bicycle, I do not drive a car, I do not go up mountains, I hate small islands. I'm here to tell the tale. You know, my wife has to drive me everywhere. But I know more about cities than many people who drive. Now that's very selfish. I have time to look out of the window and say, oh, that's rather interesting. You know, I think at my kind of age, you post-rationalize upon your weaknesses. I will support drawing because I don't know no better. Don't know no better. You know, what can you do? Draw, get your pencil up, there you go, dots are up, how's it gone? There you go. Does that answer your question?
It's lovely, thank you.
You were going to ask me a question.
Yes, I was going to ask, I wanted to ask you a question because at the beginning of your work, you seem to make a really clear distinction between the hard line, the soft line, things which are in opposition with each other. But then your drawings are suggesting something slightly different. And it seems that you may be drawn towards the notion that it's not either or, and that it is growing into something else. And if this is something that you're looking at in terms of your next interest, because it seems that in terms of the field work, there was clear distinction between the two.
Yeah, I haven't built much anyhow, and what little I have built has tended to be on the hard side. I know. You know, we thought we nearly got there with the Spanish villa project, which is meant to be an upmarket department store, kept alive by an enormous amount of car parking, which is hidden underneath it. And that went and got through planning, and then, you know, balloon burst in Madrid, end of story. But clearly that's one of the things one wants to explore, and I suppose one is in a sort of academic position vis-a-vis that what does really fascinate me a lot are one or two. There's another German historical example which I often use, which is the gardens at Schwetzingen, which were done by Italian gardeners in the 18th century, where there's a lot of lattice work, and then these pieces of enclosure that change by summer and winter and so on. So I'm fascinated by the Würzburg example because it seems to me a very telling case of language, of vocabulary. And again, I think another thing that I observe among some of the current work, which I admire tremendously, but to do here, which is that it's a bit over-consistent. I would criticize it in the same way that I criticize Plug-in City, which is that it's too busy holding on to itself. The interesting moment will come when it starts to break down and allow of itself to have the odd interlude. So that's not saying you want to sort of anything comes, but that's why I'm fascinated by the play of one condition upon another. And perhaps the hard soft is slightly artificial, or it works for some things and then the conversation drifts away. And I even noticed myself when I was just massaging the lecture a couple of days ago, putting some new stuff in, that I thought, well, this isn't either hard or soft. It's a sort of, but bits of it need to identify or articulate their hardness, and other bits must be soft, otherwise it's horrendous. But your basic observation is absolutely on the dot. Yes, I am aware of that myself. Maybe the next lecture, it's the next one, will not be about that at all. I'm starting another theme, which would be a funny one, called eventually 101 Ideas. And I left my son, who's writing electronic music, to do 10 of the ideas as musical statements, and I'm going to weld the projects towards them. So we can see what happens in that. At the moment I've got hard and soft because it's there, it's in the can. It's not really in the can. One final question. Or two questions and no more then. Yeah.
Is architecture the best medium for what you're talking about?
Probably not. But I know no other. No, that's too many.
I'm really struck by the way that you talk about your work, because it's quite funny. It's quite funny. And
Good, that's right.
And I feel like so often when architects talk, it's not. And I'm really curious what you feel is the role of it.
Oh, I've been surrounded by po-faced, worthy people of 30 years old who ought to be older than me. I mean, particularly if you go to the East Coast of the United States, they are the worst. But even now it's spread into, I mean, these po-faced, these people who write this stuff for what do they call them? Authenticated journals. You know, these journals that are the same three people writing to the other three people and all that crap. I mean, I'm absolutely pissed off. And there's a wonderful thing, because in Paris about a month ago, I was part of a... is Didier here?
Yeah.
Hi, you were there. And I had a tirade about, you know, the wordy thing, particularly, you know, the Americans borrow from the French, all that crap. And I can't read that stuff. And it's an ongoing battle with Odile Deck on this subject. Well, we send each other up sort of agreeably over the bottom of mine. And then she very kindly sent me the cover of the Dutch magazine, which has Young Ho Chang saying, "All those French philosophers send me to sleep." Wonderful, wonderful. But I've been surrounded by it. I've had the most tedious, you know. Somebody gave me a magazine the other night called, what is it called? What? Log. Oh God, it's full of it. Diving down your rectum and stuff. No, I don't care. Look, you know, I'm old. I'm 72. I don't care a fuck. You know, I'm not going to look over my shoulder and get brownie points. So I can say what I like. You know, as long as I don't pick my nose on this platform. You know. And I'm you know, I strongly believe. I think that architecture has been hijacked by these tedious people. These tedious people. You know, the last thing we want is a proper historian. I hear this word around that you're supposed to be getting a proper historian. Save the money. Spend it on something else. You don't fall down that pit hole. You know? Bloody load of rubbish. I mean, gets in the way. I read a bit of Derrida. I read a half a page of Derrida. It was so pompous. Look at that. You know, pompous thought. Yeah, bloody hell. Yeah. Does that answer your question?